Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Rod Kippax, Senior Inclusion Manager at Mercy Community Services, a Catholic service provider that cares for people across a range of needs, from families to those who need aged care, as well as people with disabilities. As part of his role, Rod works with Romero Centre, a service that provides and connects asylum seekers living in Brisbane with practical support, like food and shelter, legal connections, English classes, and so much more. Romero is part of the Mercy community. Now, if that sounds a bit complicated, truth is, it is. But as we delve into the community sector, it quickly becomes apparent that this is not banking. A lack of resources, together with the need to be flexible and adjust to the needs of clients, means the roles people perform are not cookie cutter roles. And the joy to be found here is the people who work within the sector are definitely not cookie cutter people. And this brings us to you, Rod. Welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Naomi. Really glad to have the opportunity.
And the reason we're having this interview today, or perhaps the moment that spurred the idea for the interview, was the other day we were taking some photos for Romero Centre, and you rocked up with your truck and your hat on, and we took these amazing images of you. And I said, I think people need to know about this truck of yours and how it's a symbol for the work that you do. So first up, can you describe your truck to the audience, people who haven't seen it, and talk a little bit about how it performs this function within your work that's really important?
Okay, how to describe? The other day, Richard said to me, like that it was a part of my identity, and I was actually really surprised by that. Well, and it is. It's the technical thing. It's a four-wheel drive Holden Rodeo. 1998 Holden Rodeo. So it's like getting on in years. It's actually an old farm ute. I had it when I lived down in northern New South Wales on the farm, and it had a few unexpected incidents with trees and banks of creeks where it got bogged. And my daughter learned how to drive on it, and it has a nice dent as a part of a memory of that time in the side. So it's a bit of a rough old ute now. But it's incredibly useful for me. It's incredibly useful for me, and probably in a number of different ways. First and foremost, I don't actually have an office at either Romero or at Mercy Inclusion. Because my job is about inclusion, I try to get about. I get about the different offices. Mercy's spread around the place, and so my ute is sort of my office, and I have a bag which I have all my office stuff in. And I just go from office to office with my ute and my bag, my backpack. I quite often get people saying, "Oh, you want a mountain expedition?" or something like that. I think in another level, I really like utes because they can go anywhere. Well, that's the first thing. Four-wheel drive ute, you can go anywhere. You don't need to worry about it getting knocked around. No one's going to steal my ute. Touch wood. Just going to touch wood here. No one's going to steal my ute. Yeah, it's not, and it really reminds me of something when I was younger, child. Australia then really frowned upon people big noting through their cars. Like it was considered shameful to be a big noter and to show off, and with a flash car. If you had a flash car, it wasn't a good look. And I've really liked that part of Australian ethos, and so I keep to it. I don't need a flash car. I just got my ute.
And I think it really speaks to this idea of the flexibility in the role that you play too, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And also the humility in the role. Inclusion is about humility. Inclusion is about really loving the gifts and the ideas and the thoughts and the contribution that other people make. You enjoy what you contribute as well, but I'm familiar with what I can bring and my own thoughts. They're in my head 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for endless years. But it's just a joy when you hear somebody else come up with something which you'd never thought of, or a way of being which you'd never, ever thought of. And I think the ute speaks to that, because it's about humility. You know, it's about not trying to make an impression, but rather trying to be there with people.
I've got this image now of you packing the stories from other people in the back of your ute and carrying them around with you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So we've had a few kind of pretty deep conversations between us, haven't we? And I'm interested in hearing from you about your origins. Like, what did you originally study? What were you originally set on being? Because, of course, a lot of people come into this kind of work without really having planned to do that. Can you tell us the story of kind of how you started?
Well, that's an interesting story. Well, an interesting story, maybe. Mark Bruff, Professor Mark Bruff, who works at QUT, and he said to me one day, "My God, your life is like a dedicated ethnographic study." And part of that was because I actually grew up at Mount Druitt in Sydney. And I don't know whether you're familiar with Mount Druitt, but it's a really marginalised, oppressed area in Sydney. But my father, who didn't live with us, he lived at Bilgola, which is on the north shore of Sydney, which is, again, if you're not familiar with Sydney, it is a very flash part of Sydney. And every now and then I used to be sort of like beamed up like Scotty into this other world, then beamed back again. You know, so I'd be in Mount Druitt, then in the North Shore, and then back into Mount Druitt. And I think that set it up, but I didn't know really. I didn't know at the time. That set up like a fascination with society and relationship. But I didn't know that. What I wanted to do was, like many boys do, is do what their dad wanted to do, and that was to do marine science. And so I didn't really have much of a clue when I was going through school, and I went, "Oh, I'll go into marine science." And so that's what I did. I did zoology, and in that I went, I'm not actually really interested in this, but I'm really interested in behaviour. I love the animal behaviour. And then I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll go into an arts degree and I'll study history, because I really love, society and history. So that's what I did, and I loved it. I truly, really, truly loved it. And I got all the way up to my honours in history, and I went, I don't want to spend the rest of my life writing to like 3 blokes about Freudian analysis of conservative thinkers in America. And so I dropped out of that, and I completely dropped out then, and went through an interesting period until I met my wife, and I eventually moved up and lived with her in Brisbane. And she said, essentially, "You're not going to hang around here and sleep all day and do nothing." And so like she went, "Oh, okay, what am I going to do?" And she said, "Well, you had a friend who was a youth worker. You said you've always been interested in that. Why don't you go and do that?" So that's what I did. I went and volunteered at a place called All Andes, which is All Nations Displaced Youth Service out of Goodna. And I loved it. Like I said, I want a job in which I don't have to go to work at 9 o'clock in the morning. I don't have to wear a suit, and I get to play lots of games. Youth work, that's it. So that's what I did. And I loved it right from the very, very beginning. And I became obsessed with it as well. I thought, wow, how do you get really good at this? And then that set me off on a trajectory for the rest of my life, really. Or as other people would say, an obsessive compulsive disorder for the rest of my life.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about. Is that part of your nature, to become obsessed with things and to want to know everything that you can about them and be the best you can? Or is it just this particular area that has you in its grip?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I often say to when I am mentoring students now, I said, in this field, I think it really pays to be a bit obsessive and a lot oppositional defiant. So both of those characteristics are in me. Like obsession, well, like I'm not the kind of person that needs to step on every line as I go and take the dog for a walk. But I do have that in me, like to deeply know something, not just to skirt around the outside, but to deeply know it. So, for example, when I became interested in the esoteric. It wasn't enough to read my astrology signs. I needed to study astrology to understand it better. But it's the same with working with young people. I went, okay, what's the heart of this? And stop me if I'm rambling. But what's the heart of this? The heart of this is relationship. That seems pretty obvious. And then it was, well, okay, but what's the heart of relationship? Oh, that's these interactions that you have. Okay, so what's the heart of those interactions that are actually inclusive and productive? And so I got down to the micro detail of conversations, exclusive and inclusive conversations, and how you did it.
And so any tips?
Any tips? Yeah. Like the tips would be, the first tip would be, don't trust the way you see the world. Like that's the first tip. Like it's called epistemic humility, eh? And that's where the humility comes in again. You have to realize that your way of seeing and hearing is incredibly flawed and yet incredibly compelling. And it's even more compelling when everybody around you believes in the same thing. And so that's the heart of scientific discovery, isn't it? It's just to stop thinking the same way that everybody around you thinks. But that's not so easy because you have no consciousness of what it is that you can't see. It's a bit like you can only see black when there's white. If there's no white, then you're not even aware that you're only seeing black. So that's to mistrust your own self, your own way of seeing and thinking. And the second tip would be that everybody that comes into your life, every single person has got something that they can actually share with you that's going to expand your life and free your life. And so that's the starting point. And then there's all these other tricks that you do.
Any memories or moments from tip 2 that you kind of care to share?
Oh, about other people, you mean?
Oh.
I mean, look, Eve, one memory, probably what really started me thinking along these lines, when I was working with young people, and I worked in a place called Centre Education Program, which was like total immersion in the world of really wild young people. It was a alternative school for young people who had been refused entry into schools or been kicked out of any schools, yeah? And I went in with fairly, traditional mainstream ideas about helping these poor dysfunctional people who were really disadvantaged, helping them get back onto their feet and teaching them things like goal setting and stuff like that. And so when I had an opportunity to work with there's a Commonwealth diver, and I can't even remember how I got in contact with her, but there was a Commonwealth diver, and she says, oh, I understand you work with marginalised young people. I'm interested in giving them some free training. I thought, how superb, because the wild young people I work with were incredibly acrobatic. They do really frightening things. They get a concrete pole on the street with concrete ground, and they do a double somersault off the concrete pole onto the ground. Yeah. So as a matter of course, this is what we're going to do now. It's just really fun. And I'll be freaking out totally, going, oh, okay, I'm not sure how safe this is. But anyway, so I thought, great, we're going to use a constructive thing. And I took them along, and they went along to a few, like 2 or 3, and then they didn't want to come anymore. And my interpretation of that was, oh, yes, these marginalised young people, they just don't have the discipline. They don't have the self-discipline that's required to, progress. My job now is to support them with that. But when I actually listened to them, they said they had a couple of critiques of it. They said it's really boring and artificial. But the main critique was that they didn't want to be big noters, and they didn't like doing activities where it was just about them as an individual and not their community of friends. So it wasn't a community of friends doing things. It was actually about individuals big noting how better they were than their other friends at something, and then being measured and assessed at that. They didn't want to do it. And that just cracked open a whole universe for me. I went, oh my God. And it was true, it was absolutely true.
Yeah, I've got tingles listening to that story.
Oh, I went on a camp, Naomi, shortly after that, in which it was a water skiing camp. And all the adults, and including me, spent their time trying to get up on one ski or no ski. You know, first two skis and then one ski and then no skis. And it was really, really frustrating and embarrassing and stressful trying to do all that stuff. And the young people, all they wanted to do was hop on the back of the, you know, one of those big tire things, you know, those big things? Yeah, and hang on for dear life as the person's doing the boat was trying to get them off. It was hilarious and it was so much fun. And about 2/3 the way through this thing, I went, wait a minute, I'm doing this bullshit. I'm doing this competitive, individualistic, hierarchical crap. I want to do that. That sounds like fun. So I did that.
Yeah, wow. Cool stories.
Mm.
So how, you've talked a little bit about, you know, what your official title is at Mercy and all of that stuff, but how does that sort of learning inform what you do day to day on the ground? You know, what does an average day look like, and how are those two aspects of inclusion included in that day-to-day stuff?
Okay, so I mean, my overall job is about inclusion and mercy. So the challenge and a part of that, which has actually taken up most of my time so far with Mercy, is actually working with the Romero Centre, and trying to support the Romero Centre to be sustainable and robust and be able to share this beautiful story that they have with more and more people, like to be able to reach out to more and more people and say, there's actually something pretty incredible happening here. You know, I think it's an answer that a lot of people are looking for in our very alienated society. So that's been a part of it. And the other part of it is attempting to embed a culture of inclusion in Mercy. But I haven't really had huge amount of time to do that part because I've been so immersed in the Romero part. To answer your question, if you start off with a position of humility and also curiosity, that is the essence of inclusion. I mean, there's skills in there, like there's other skills. So like when I so I have in my head, I have this whole framework of interactional monitors, which is essentially what I believe counts as listening. So, for example, one of the things that counts as listening is that when you say something, I try to orient to what you've just said. And if I'm not doing that, if I'm injecting something that I think, so if you say something, public health and social work is the best course in the universe, and I go, well, I'm not too sure about that because I think, zoology is the best course. See how I've actually oriented to something in my head. Whereas if I'm truly listening, I actually orient to what you've just said. And so the very next words that come out of my mouth after you've just said that will be, oh, really, Naomi, what is it that makes you think?
Yeah, tell me more.
Believe that.
Yeah.
And so that's a trick you have in your head. Now I don't do that all the time, but at least I know when I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Having that subversive, Naomi.
Yeah.
Really, really subversive at a very fundamental, foundational level. So having those things, starting off with humility, the curiosity, and the belief, oh wow, this person is coming here to share something with me. And it's a bit like you or you and I here in this conversation. We've come a long way to be here together right now. Look, it's a long way, an extraordinary series of events that actually have led to this. And so I want to honor that as much as possible by really, I'm talking obviously, but, listening to what you have to share with me. And so that's what I bring to inclusion. It's like setting up systems. How can as an organization, how do you do that on an organizational level? How can you recognize people and get people into work together and value them and assess and, have access?
Interesting. So going back to Romero and the work that they do, I'd love to do a little plug for them because I think a lot of people don't know what Romero is about and the kinds of amazing community work that they're doing. And going also back to this idea of community and the stuff that the youth, the young people taught you. So tell us about Romero's central programs and what the kind of main mission of the organisation is.
Sorry, the main image, did you say?
Mission. So what are they? What are they about? What do they want to achieve? And how?
Okay, so that's curious. So the mission of the Romero Centre is to strengthen the well-being of the Queensland community by providing opportunities for them to be in compassionate relationship to people seeking asylum.
Interesting.
So
it's not about the refugees and asylum seekers.
So it's the primary. It's like this dualistic focus. It's in relationship to each other. But the main focus, one of the foci is the well-being of the Queensland community itself. And that's in a number of different ways. On a very basic spiritual or community level, it's about offering opportunities for people to experience genuine, compassionate community. And this idea of that when we're compassionate, it's the opposite. You know, truths are often the opposite to what we actually expect them to be. And so belonging, for example, I remember working with young people, and I wanted to come up with a support plan that was not bullshit, you know, which was actually something real, and also that didn't marginalize young people. So I come up with this thing about, well, what sort of things need to be in place in everybody's life, you know, not just these young people, but everybody's life, to have a good life. And one of them was, of course, was a sense of belonging. And then when we thought about that a little bit more, we went, well, how do you actually do a sense of belonging? How do you actually get a sense of belonging? And then it occurred to us, when you look around, the people that have a sense of belonging are the ones that are actually giving to other people. So I belong in my family because I give things to them. I belong in my community because I give. I belong at work because I'm a part of a team that gives. And so then belonging comes with giving. And it's also, of course, giving is not egotistic. And I believe, one of my beliefs is that the ego, although very helpful, is also one of the primary barriers to joy and happiness. And that, so if you can get around, wherever you can get around the ego, you're going to have a much more joyful life, let alone being the sense of belonging and the sense of connected to people and just feeling bloody good. In our society, we can be very, very alienated, and we're also really strongly encouraged to be about us and not about the other. You know, there's the me bank and the consumerism, all those kinds of things work to, and the whole individualistic ethos works in one direction to isolate us, really. The Romero has an antidote to that, because they're about, basically, and it may sound really corny, but it's about loving each other, and not just each other, but, you know, like everything that's life, you know, the planet, but loving each other and saying, well, okay, these people here, they have nothing. They've escaped war and torture and sexual violence. They've traveled incredibly dangerous paths. And now they've landed here and they've been treated incredibly badly. You know, that, can you imagine that? Can you imagine coming from a place of torture and violence, and you think, oh, if I get to this place, I'll be safe. And what happens is you then get locked up in detention for no crime that you've committed indefinitely, 8 years, 9 years, indefinitely. And your family is still, because your hope was, if I send this robust person, they'll be able to bring the rest of the family. They can't even connect with their family, let alone bring them over. So that's the opportunity. And I think that also, like I said, on one way, it's a spiritual opportunity and a social community health opportunity to actually get a taste of community. And when you go down to the Romero Centre, if you ever go down there, you feel that when you walk in. When I first went in there, I thought, oh my God, this is like stepping back into like an 80s, 70s or 80s service, you know? It's like really chilled, and there's no glass walls, and, you know, like, and people laugh and smile and greet you, and you ask you whether you want to have a cup of tea. You know, there's no security passes to get in or out or anything like that. There's just people and kids and, you know, old bloody utes in the backyard, you know, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it reminded me immediately of my communion preparation. We used to have to go once a week to this woman's house called Mrs. Woodhead, and she would prepare us for communion. And it just reminded me so much of her house.
Yeah.
Get out her guitar.
Oh, true. Did she?
play us songs. And of course we used to think it was hilarious.
Yeah.
Like mortified at the thought of having to sit with her and sing. But you know, I can see that now as an adult, that she was trying to create a sense of unity and community for us.
Exactly.
We felt very safe, even though we found the whole singing thing.
Yeah, she was trying to be creative.
Yeah, she was. Those, you know, as long as you don't rip out your guitar, Rod, I think.
No, not yet. I can't play the guitar, but there's people there. There's a piano there that was actually donated by All Hallows. Oh, All Hallows? No, that may not be right. It could be St. Lawrence's. It was either St. Lawrence's or All Hallows. And we have people seeking asylum who are gifted pianists, you know, like absolutely gifted. And they play those pianos. And oh my God, you walk in there when that's happening. It's like, oh. And then we have the El Salvadorian community, people who actually met Oscar Romero, like, you know, spent time with Oscar Romero. But then we have those people, and they have a choir, El Salvadorian choir, and sometimes at Christmas time in particular, they'll come and they'll sing, and so they're singing all these El Salvadorian Christmas songs and playing the piano, and it's just beautiful. I'm lucky enough to sit around in a team. So the Romero team, you've got people with lived experience of seeking asylum. Not all of them, but they come from all different countries. So, but Mengistu and Beata have. So they've both have lived experience. So Mengistu is from Ethiopia. Beata, who's the manager, is from Poland. You have Hui, who's from China. Sarah, who's from China, and Deepa, who's from India. Right. So I get the opportunity to sit around. Oh, and there's Richard, who's come on now, who's another Anglo-Celtic like myself. I get to sit around in this team, you know, and it's just, you feel so safe and valued, and everybody feels safe and valued. And it's really inspirational and creative, the work. And it's all about, well, how can we actually help these people? And how can we actually help the wider, or help the wider Australian community as well? How can we be the best bridge that we can be? And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this is beautiful. Like this is like heaven, really. It's like the way the world should and could be, like this.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Did I answer your question?
It doesn't really matter.
Humility.
The questions are just
the
starting point.
And so they're all teachers. They've all taught me all this stuff endlessly, over and over and over and over again, simply because I go, I'm really curious, and I suspect I'm really humble about what I bring, and also the way I see the world.
So I'll put a link in the comments below, and if you're listening via audio, wherever you're listening from, there'll be a link to Romero Centre. And if you would like to get involved in some of the work that Romero does, for instance, you can offer a bed for someone who is seeking refuge. I'll put a link down so that you can follow that link and find out more about how you can help. And finally, we sort of got onto the spiritual aspect of your work a little bit in how you were talking before, Rod, but I really do want to ask you about that. It is a central part of how you do what you do. And I'm interested in sort of the on the ground stuff. How does that sense of spirituality that you carry with you as a human influence the day-to-day work that you do with people? You've touched on it a little bit already, but can you expand on that? Maybe a few memories or stories, things that have happened in your interactions where spirituality has been a key to unlocking something really important in your relationships with people.
Truth. You know, when you sent me some of the questions you might ask, Naomi, I saw that question. I went, like, how can you possibly answer that? How can I answer that? Like, what is spirituality? You know, so it's such a big word to begin with, isn't it? So what actually is it? So, okay, well, we could write a thesis, but let's not do that. but in some ways, the question doesn't even make sense to me where I am now. Like I'd say I started off as this full-on rationalist atheist in the past, and I've just been on this journey of logic, really, and experience, logic and experience. And it'd be a bit like saying, what's the point of the water to a sailor? Or what's the point of geography to someone flying a plane? Like, if you have no sense of what the point of being alive is, or having some vague idea of that, can we teach anybody? Or we're just wandering around ourselves. And I think, so that's the first thing. It's really, really important to me that my version of spirituality is about about universal love, which is also a collective unconscious. Yeah. And so in that, and that's a nice antidote again to individualism and egotistic individualism and managerialism and, trying to control everything and then getting really anxious. It's no surprise that we live in a society where anxiety is the most common disorder on the planet. Anxiety. Why is that? Trying to control the future, control everything around us. So what that gives to me is a sense of, again, it's a sense of humility and a sense of place and a sense of that I don't have to control anything. All I have to do is be the best person I can be and be most in my heart and connected that I can be. And then all else will follow. Now, you have to be clever in that. That's not just, I don't have my brain anymore. But that's the impulse. The impulse is that being this connected, and that's humility, and that you don't have to be in control. And so, of course, then when you're working with other people, when you actually don't have to be in control, you're more relaxed and you create a space for empowerment. People actually then can step into that space and you can celebrate who they are, not try to anxiously recover who you are. So it deeply informs it. And an example of that, a practical example of that is at the Romero Center, and people go, oh, how does that work? How does that work? How does that work? Well, it works because we have a faith that we are doing what Castaneda would call the path of the heart, and that things unfold when you're doing that, and they do unfold. So we're not interested in, for example, in a managerialist framework, they'd say, okay, the government's given us 50 loaves of bread. We've got 500 people. That means everybody gets, 10 loaves, and then we're going to assess you whether you're actually truly deserving, of your 10 pieces of bread. You might only be really deserving of 2 pieces of bread because you might be lying to us about how much, that kind of road, that comes from trying to manage and overmanage. No, at the Romero Center, we just go, how much bread do you need? Here's the bread that you need. 2 pieces of bread aren't going to do it for you. We might as well, not give you any bread. Here's how much bread you need. We trust that the generous heart of the community and the universe will actually bring us more bread for other people. And it does. And it does. So that's how it informs. And also, I suppose, whenever I meet somebody, it's the same thing. I go, this person here, it's not about them being disadvantaged or, marginalized, or that's the thing that young people, working with people, you go, like, in some ways I'm a faker, like I may seem together when I'm at work, but ask any of my family what kind of a lunatic I am. So it just seems ridiculous, to get up there and pretend, oh yeah, I'm going to heal you, or, what? No, we actually we'll heal each other. I may be able to help you. You can actually help me. That kind of process. And that again is in that side of, well, in the sight of whatever you want to call it, the collective unconscious, God, Allah, the universal love, everything's equal. Everything has life in it, flowing through it. Everything's in relationship to each other. I'm not bigger than anybody else. It's a ridiculous notion.
I don't know about the audience and people listening, but I already feel calmer having listened to you. Thank you.
No, thank you, Naomi.
So much in that. We haven't spoken for that long, but so many nuggets of value and worth and contemplation there, Rod. So I really appreciate you chatting with us today. And again, I will put the links to Mercy and Romero in the comments so people can learn more about the work that Mercy and Romero do, the important work, and how they can give and support. So thank you very much for being.
No worries, Nam. Thank you very much. See you later.